Paris never truly sleeps. It trembles. Even now, when the streets lie washed in pale dawn and the fog curls over the Seine, the air hums with the echo of yesterday's cheers and sobs. I have grown used to the sound of a crowd before breakfast. The murmur of thousands, the scrape of wheels on wet cobblestones, the slow breath of a city waiting for blood. This morning, the smell of iron still clings to my coat. The wood of the scaffold is slick, the blade polished clean, as if it too needs to forget. They call me the executioner of Paris. Some whisper my name as if it were a curse. Charles-Henri Sanson, hereditary servant of justice, sworn hand of the law. My father passed the office to me as one might hand down a sword or a disease. I learned to tie the knots, measure the drop, balance the weight of mercy and necessity. But no one teaches you how to carry the silence afterward. When the revolution began, I was no longer a man but an instrument. My hand belonged to France. Each name on the parchment became a duty. A few strokes of ink, a life concluded. I did not choose kings over commoners. The blade is blind. It demands only precision. Still, some nights when Paris sleeps beneath its veil of soot and whispers, I hear them, the footsteps of those who climbed the steps before me. I remember the morning of the king, January 21st, 1793. The sky hung low and gray over the Place de la Révolution. The drums drowned the prayers. I saw him approach the scaffold with the composure of a man walking to church. Louis Capet, once Louis XVI. No crown, no guards, only dignity left. He looked at me not as a monster, but as a man. For a moment, I envied his calm. When I lifted my hand, signaling the drums to cease, the crowd froze. His last words carried across the square like a candle flame flickering against the wind. Then the blade fell, swift and perfect. I was praised for my steadiness. Citizens shouted that justice had finally spoken. Yet my hands trembled when I cleaned the blood from the plank. The guillotine was supposed to bring equality, to make death clean and merciful. But even in its mechanical grace, it hums with sorrow. Months later, another name appeared on the parchment. Marie Antoinette, Widow Capet, the Queen of France. Her trial had been a spectacle. Accusations whispered in the cafes, pamphlets sold in the gutters, children chanting her name as if it were a curse. They said she bathed in milk while peasants starved, that she consorted with her brother-in-law, that she mocked the dying. The Republic demanded her head not for her crimes, but for what she represented. I remember that October morning as if carved into my bones. The air was cold enough to bite the skin. She arrived in a simple white shift, her hair cut short, her face pale but resolute. Gone was the jeweled splendor of Versailles. In her eyes, I saw not arrogance, but exhaustion. She glanced toward the crowd, searching for something, perhaps her son, perhaps forgiveness. Whispers spread that I bowed before her, that I wept as I prepared the blade. But historians will tell you this was only rumor. What cannot be disputed, however, is that I treated her as I had treated her husband, with the respect due to a soul about to leave this world. When I tied her hands, she apologized for stepping on my foot. "Pardon, monsieur," she said softly. Even now the words echo through my head like a bell tolling across an empty field. She climbed the steps herself, refusing assistance. When the drums began, she lifted her chin, proud even in ruin. A few moments later, the blade fell again, clean and final. The crowd roared, but I remember only the silence afterward, the stillness that pressed against my chest as the fog swallowed the scaffold. I returned home that night with her image still before me. My wife said I looked pale. My eldest son, Gabriel, would soon inherit my post, and I wondered what kind of legacy I was leaving him. I lit a candle and opened my journal. Ink pooled across the paper like dark blood. I wrote not of politics or justice, but of faces, the way fear looks different in every pair of eyes, the way courage trembles like a leaf before it steadies itself. For years, I recorded every execution, each name and date as duty required. But between the lines, I began to confess. The diary became my absolution. When I look back now, those pages are heavier than any blade, They contain the weight of thousands of lives and the measure of my own decay. There were days when the work seemed almost holy. I believed that by ending suffering swiftly, I served mercy itself. The priests spoke of divine order, the politicians of justice. Yet none of them ever stood where I did, feeling the breath of a condemned man brush against your wrist. After the Queen's death, Paris grew fevered. The streets bled rebellion. The guillotine worked without rest. I began to move through my days like a ghost, efficient, exact, detached. People thought me cold, but detachment was survival. If I had felt every cry, I would have drowned in it. Once, a young revolutionary approached me in a tavern. He called me Citizen Equalizer, raising his glass as though I were a hero. I smiled, but inside I felt nothing. The crowd sees the fall of a head. I see the hollow where it once rested. There were nights when I dreamt of the scaffold creaking under my own weight. I'd wake drenched in sweat, the echo of the drums still in my ears. My wife would whisper that I served the law, that guilt was a sin of the weak. But law is only a word when written in blood. The revolution devoured itself. Those who had cheered now trembled beneath the same blade. I executed Danton, then Robespierre, and with each stroke, I felt the circle tighten. By the time the terror ended, Paris had no more appetite for death. The guillotine, once a symbol of justice, became a ghost no one dared name. They say I lived quietly after that I retired to my home and watched my sons take up the family office. But the truth is simpler. I did not retire from death. I only slowed its procession. I continued to write in my diary, each page a confession to no one, each line a plea for peace I would never earn. One entry remains unfinished. The ink dried before I could write the final word. It was meant for her, for Marie. I had written, "The Queen died as she had lived, in the gaze of others. Yet in her final breath, she looked at me not as her killer, but as the last witness of her humanity." Perhaps that is why her memory haunts me more than any other. Kings die, but the death of a queen changes the air itself. The perfume of the court lingers even in the mud of the scaffold. Now, years later, the city no longer chants my name. The blade is silent. The diary lies beside me, heavy with ghosts. Outside, the bells of Notre Dame toll as they did the morning after the king's death. Each sound reminds me that I once held history by the throat. Some say I was proud of my precision. Others call me a monster. Both are true. The hand that steadied the blade was the same that trembled over the diary. I served justice, but justice served no one. If I could speak to the young man who first lifted the sword, I would tell him that duty without doubt is the most dangerous weapon of all. The guillotine was meant to cleanse France of tyranny, but it only taught us how swiftly mercy can be forgotten. The citizens cheered for equality, yet in their cheers I heard hunger, for vengeance, for spectacle, for meaning. They looked at the falling blade and believed the world renewed. But when the crowd dispersed, the same poverty, the same despair, waited at every corner. Only the faces had changed. I have been many things, a servant, a father, a man of order. But above all, I have been a witness. Not to politics, but to the quiet moment between breath and oblivion. In that space, all are equal, kings, thieves, and revolutionaries alike. When I close my eyes, I see her again, standing before the guillotine. The wind lifts her hair, the fog curls around her like a shroud. For a heartbeat, I think she smiles. Then the drums begin, and I am once more the hand of fate. Paris will forget the sound of my name, but not the sound of the blade. It will echo in the stones long after I am gone. And somewhere in that echo, my diary will whisper the truth the crowds never heard, that the man behind the executioner's mask was neither hero nor fiend, but something in between. I was the only man in Paris who had shaken hands with both kings and corpses,